So now I want to go into some facts and origins of object relations theory. It was originally mentioned by a guy called Sandor Ferenczi in 1917. So that much in history, that long ago, it was actually mentioned for the first time. That time there was not even a mention of attachment. It was just basically still Freudian era going on in all over Europe. Freud was a revolution at that time, and he was still alive, and his work was very much being appreciated all over Europe. At the same time, it was also being criticized for being too radical. So he had basically divided the world of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy in Europe at that time into two groups: one who supported him and one who were against him. Most psychiatrists, neurologists, neurosurgeons of those era were all against Freud, because they felt that Freud's idea that hysteria and psychosis can be cured by narrative therapy and by understanding a person's psyche was very radical. Most psychiatric units at that time in Europe used, electric therapy, so electric shock therapy, and sort of sedatives, things like that in severe psychosis. And Freud came along and said, you know what, I think let's just try to give these people a chance to talk and see if that helps. And so there was this huge divide between psychiatrists and doctors and neurosurgeons and the psychoanalysts and psychologists and the Freudian camp. So that's when object relations actually originated, because it was very much based on what was going on at that time in Europe with Freud's theories. And Freud's theories obviously centered very much around mother and child and the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex, which in itself was a very radical thought process, which people were actually quite shocked by in Europe. So he had essentially divided the world of mental health practitioners into two camps. And Sandor Ferenczi, who was a very famous Hungarian psychoanalyst at that time in 1917, was actually very close to Freud and a very close colleague of Freud. Just geographically, Freud was from Vienna, and Vienna and Budapest, where I lived for a very long time, are about 2 hours away from each other by road. So geographically, that region was Freud's home, and he had a lot of support from Viennese and Hungarian psychoanalysts as a result of his being born there. So Sandor Ferenczi was the first man to actually take Freud's theories and elaborate on them, and he actually used the word object for the first time in relation to a mother and child. So he emphasized something what he called the regressum ad uterum, or the uterine regression. This basically is very simple to understand. It means that it's a regression or a desire. A regression is basically something like going back or being taken back or stuck somewhere behind in your past. If you understand regression as a term, that's what it means. So he basically emphasized on a desire to return to the comfort of the womb. He said that the womb or the mother are seen as a primary object of love. Later on, there were many other Hungarian psychoanalysts. There was Michael Balint and all these other psychoanalysts, Hungarian psychoanalysts, who took this primary object of love and tried to make theories out of it. But none of the theories really ever got successful in convincing people. It was only Sandor Ferenczi as a Hungarian who got really famous for mentioning this primary object of love, which he felt was the mother. And he's written things like, obviously those quotations and books are all in Hungarian, but he's written things like the comfort of warm water, for example. Almost everybody finds warm water on the body comforting, and this was basically the desire to be surrounded by amniotic fluid, which is in the womb. And that's why all of us find a warm shower or a warm bath very comforting, because it reminds us of the environment that was in the womb. So even though I said that other psychoanalysts like Michael Balint and all these other Hungarian as well, who came after Ferenczi, they tried to emphasize object relations in their own way. But none of those theories really ever caught on until Melanie Klein came along. And Melanie Klein was not Hungarian. She was, I think, American. And she was the one who was basically, her theories were the one that actually got most associated with object relations. Like, even though there's Fairbairn, who was very famous as well, but whenever you talk of object relations in Europe today, the first name that comes to your mind is Melanie Klein, because it's known as the Kleinian theory or the Kleinian object relation theory. So these were the two names that were most famous and most related to object relations. It was actually Ronald Fairbairn who came up with the term itself, object relations, but it was mostly Klein's work, which was most recognized, and even today is most recognized in terms of object relations theory. And we will discuss both the theories separately. So you have to understand that before I go in, that Klein and Fairbairn, even though they both talk of object relations, they have their own version of it. They have their own explanation of it. So it's two separate ways that they've described object relations. So we'll go into the two different types of object relation theory.